right. Good afternoon, everyone. Happy Friday. We're talking about an interesting topic today. I'm Suzanne Caron. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at HighRoad Solution. And we're going to talk today about competitive analysis. So we're just going to go ahead and get started. And, you know, the tool, if you downloaded it, is super simple. But we're going to, really the magic in it is about really applying it to today's world, about how we can use such a simple structure to really view the world differently. And that's the point of it. So if you downloaded the tool and you're like, well, that seems a little lackluster, it's probably because it is. And we're going to step through it again. The benefit is in the application of the tool and how you can use such a simple structure. So today's outline for our agenda for what we want to accomplish today is that, if you notice here, it's not a typo, but we're going to review the tool from just the standpoint of what it is. We all got to get not rocket science on this one this week. And then we're going to look at applying this to your organization today. So typical ways that we see that people apply a competitive analysis. The second, then we're going to look at, okay, now that's great. That's what we're doing currently. Then saying, let's take it from the perspective of today's user. Maybe a little bit different for some of you, maybe not. You just do like a self-check and say, yes, we're on track. The second piece would be then, once we understand today's user, then can we go back and then apply it from a different standpoint? So we look at now through the lens of, let's take the same competitive analysis framework. Now let's run a couple of other kinds of programs or tools through it and see how it stacks up. That's the kind of the second component. And the third was then saying, let's apply it now to our staff. And that one's yet another way to take the same framework and look at our organization from the standpoint of, are we attracting the right talent? Would people want to work here? What are we offering them to work with, etc.? And that's an interesting one, because oftentimes in the association world, we're so focused in on, the membership or what we're doing, etc. And ultimately, sometimes the staff, let's face it, we're a little bit last on the list. So it's new tools for us are like a nice to have or what have you. So that's kind of the outline of today. So simple tool, and then how do we apply it? So the meat of it is really in how could we use this as a new lens to the world? And of course, the world I'm talking about is the one that is dominated by digital, and that is constructed around the almighty user. And we talk about that concept all the time here at HighRoad U. And that is really the crux when associations or organizations are talking about going through a digital transformation. It really is the point of saying, it's not so much the digital, it's being able to really indoctrinate and then acculturate to the idea that people are just different nowadays from the standpoint of how we go and buy and sell and utilize products and services. That something is fundamentally, I don't know if, expanded, et cetera, but things have shifted. It's not the same as it was, even 10 years ago. So we'll just continue to build on that idea. So first of all, let's go to the tool. Let me pop out of here, and I'm going to come over to our actual tool. All right, so if you downloaded the tool, it should have looked something like that. That's the homepage you're looking at. It's got your nice little instructions. Each time we tell you exactly what that needs to do that. But again, super easy to understand. Really, like I said, no rocket science. The excitement is really in the application, right? So much like, tools are one thing. The ability to apply tools is a whole different thing, right? I can look at open rates, click-throughs, conversions, and website visitors and say, great, I used the tool. Or then I can actually have the expertise to say, now what? And how do I apply it? And what do I do with that? So we're going to go to looking just at the tool. So I've taken an example of just the competitive product sales reference, right? And so that's the same for each one of these. And now what I'm doing is I'm just going to walk through it because I want to apply it. So basically the bottom line is, from a generic standpoint, I went ahead and customized my tabs, and we'll send this out afterwards as the downloadable version, because I know a bunch of you are going to ask that question. So the generic version that you downloaded the first time around is just something like, okay, here's your product name, and then here's some product features, and then I'm going to basically go across and talk about for each one of those products, et cetera, what it is, what does a competitor do, that I'm going out against. And here's where I think it's important to understand. So often, certain areas of an association, of course, have been doing competitive intelligence continuously and forever, right? The events, the publications, et cetera, et cetera. That's not new. What's interesting is starting to look at what you have, again, from the eyes of this changing landscape of users, or perhaps the growing landscape and world of users that we now have to serve. So it's interesting to think of, we need to now start assessing both ourselves as the organization or our product as well, our product or our program, against alternatives. So who are the other sources that could buy my product? We work a lot with a lot of the, we're very fortunate to work with many of the CPA societies, so at the state level. And so they are always, they're not usually the only game in town for being able to sell certification programs, or at least the content that is, that bears with it the ability to provide continuing education credits so that a CPA could use it, right, in renewing their certification. So in that respect, they're very familiar with looking at the idea of where are the other alternatives where I could get this information, right? Where I could buy this. So we're always looking at it from the standpoint of who are my competitors? Who are my competitors who are also offering this set of products and services, and how do I compare? And the purpose, of course, of that is taking a hard look to say, am I continuing to differentiate myself, right? Because most things over time, it's not uncommon, it is not atypical that over time, products and services become what's called commoditized. So what happens? I might be first mover to market. I bring in this amazing new technology or amazing new program or amazing new way to be able to service my membership, and over time somebody comes along and they copy me, and what do? The number one thing is typically they copy and they lower the price. So they undercut you and they start taking market share. So it's always a continuous game in the world, and that's the discipline of product marketing. Product marketers are trained to constantly look at your product mix, your product distribution, and look at all the elements of your program and product and service mix to say, am I continuing to differentiate myself against the other alternatives that the user has for buying? Well, in today's world, you can imagine it's a daunting process, because it's bad enough, before I could have gone, instead of just going to the Hilton, who's having a, let's say, a seminar with continuing education credit content from my CPA that was being offered by my state CPA society, I can now get it from another organization, it used to be, right, who was having that same kind of session material that had qualified over at, let's say, the West End. It was bad enough I had two different kind of competing providers at different physical locations. We still have that, and plus now on top of it, right, you have all of the providers of continuing education credit, let's say, that are online. So much like physical, brick and mortar colleges and universities had to go through this when they said, oh my goodness, now there's all these like Strayer and excuse me, Phoenix, and there's these online institutions that are now able to provide the same or similar products and services, yet at a lower cost, and then disrupt the market because they're able to bring it to market and provide it in a different way. And so we all have to get very good at some of those tenets of product marketing, of being able to understand, okay, well, how are we really looking at ourselves, and what are they doing, or what could we do to be able to gain a competitive advantage and differentiate ourselves and be able to either continue to serve that member or that exhibitor partner that we have, or keep the sponsor renewing, etc. Or, how could we do something different to attract, again, new customers, members, etc. And for many of us, this is where we get into talking to HighRoad, because we're in a growth mindset and we're realizing we need, as we hear it, 50 times a week, we really need new millennials, right? So we need more millennial members, or registrants, or participants, or we need them to get interested in, becoming certified. And how do we do that? Well, one of the great ways that I would say to start with the growth process and in starting with being able to attract is we have to self-assess and say, okay, well, to whom are we appealing? What are we kind of designed to do at the moment? If we want to attract this group, what do we need to do in order to, retool or to add on, et cetera? What do we need to do fundamentally as an organization to get there? And so that's how I think it fits into the whole profile now of digital, because all of digital is about, really for associations, starting to look at growth and retention, et cetera, and how can we do this in a better way. So I need to use digital technology, my information, my business intelligence, all of my channels I have at my disposal to both do retention better. It is always less expensive to keep than it is to acquire. So how can I do that better and be able to continue to deliver value, as well as how can I use this from the standpoint of being able to do acquisition, to grow. So from that standpoint, we're always thinking about, okay, I'm trying to understand how it is that I fit between our organization or our particular product or our particular program or our particular service, right, in respect to other alternatives in the market. All right, and so number one, I guess I should say even before that, many of us have not been thinking about the market in terms of a market to say, okay, what's my scope of market? What's the landscape look like? How big is that market? How much I could grow? And again, that's a huge generalization because there's many, obviously, departments that have been doing this all day, every day, from all the time. So it depends, but we're just going to take it from a couple of different ideas today. So that idea of how do we compare is not necessarily new, right, at all. Hopefully it's not. And so what we should say then is, okay, well, how do we continue to grow that and then apply it to ourselves as we start to look towards growth, right? We want to grow. We want to grow our membership. We want to grow our revenue, non-dues revenue, whatever the case might be. So I thought we'd start with just looking at something that we're all familiar with. It's always good to start from familiar. And so I just started breaking it out by things like, excuse me, live event, small conference. So I'm looking at, okay, how does my live event for a small conference? So I'm going to have a day-long session, day-long, continuing education. You got to be there live, let's say, for my whatever certification credits. I'm going to call that my small conference. How does that compare to other alternatives on the market? So again, I might my feature set to which I'm comparing. So I have to decide, okay, what am I going to study? What am I going to analyze? And then, of course, what do I think are the component parts that are worthy of analysis? And I think that's interesting, too, right there to stop for a minute, because one of the things that I think it probably, if you haven't been looking at this in a while, it might make sense to make a pause and say, have we expanded the number of categories we need to look at? And are we capturing the right ones right now that are specific to where we think we need to go? So for example, let's just take a look. So we could say, okay, for our live event small conference, how do we compare to our other competitors, right? Like maybe my product, I think it's my, my one-day course on agricultural manufacturing, and I think that's the name of my, my small day event there. And I'm saying that my differentiator, I think, is the fact that we have these content leaders and we have, 7 CEU credits or what have you that we're going to give away. Okay, so I have to take that and then go through and say, using the tool, okay, who's my competitor, right? So identify who they are, and then say, okay, do they offer it, right? How do you get it? Is it differentiated? Is it available? And that's what these little colors and the way that we've assessed them, right? So you have to say, from that standpoint, the competitor, do they offer it? Okay, for this piece here about content leaders, do they, is it available at all? Is it differentiated? Is it different from mine? Am I differentiated? And so you're just going to use this kind of color coding to fill in the box. But the key thing there is being able to really get a good handle on what these categories for analysis will be. Okay? So I could start to fill this out. So for example, for a live event, some of the pieces I might say is I need to start looking at length of time. Okay? So maybe I have an 8-hour day that starts at 8:30 in the morning. And I'm in an urban location, and they have, they start at 10 in the morning. something like that. So we have to start looking at the length of time. Also, start day of week in the end. Maybe they do theirs on Fridays and I do mine on Mondays, and I haven't looked at it in a while because we've always done that. We want to see, okay, how do I stack up? That might be, maybe, like, we don't know yet is where I'm going with that. We don't know if these are important factors, but we want to look at these as criteria that we could, we could do regression analysis on. We could look at it, we can feed into a system, be able to plot it, see how we compare, right? And most of this information on things like this, especially live events, small conference, a lot of this is readily available because it's all published online, right? So we can really start to get a good sense of that and then be able to do some pretty standard analysis with tools that are available really in Excel to be able to see how this works for us and to see, is there something, and just doing this makes it easy for us color coding to say this one, right? I'm looking for, like, wait, they have it and I don't. It's not available, or they're differentiated and we're not. Whatever the case may be. But just being able to map it out this way, getting your team to say, yeah, these are the criteria we want to look at, and let's go look at whatever, 1, 2, 3 different alternatives in the market. Maybe you'll find you have no competitors, in which case you have complete market power. Okay, everybody would like to have that. In the big world, though, probably low probability of that. So being able to look at whatever makes sense for you from an analysis, you don't want to be paralysis by analysis, but something to that effect. So the ones, again, just giving you some ideas for a live event, small conference, might be length of time, start day and the end of the week, certainly price. And I just mentioned that I put that third on purpose because most of the time that's number one. And I would caution you to first say it's a factor, but there's certainly a whole collection of data points that today's user uses to make an assessment about making the purchase, right? And so we want to not just fixate on price. Because oftentimes what I've seen in my pricing work and my product marketing work with associations is we kind of do ourselves a disservice and we immediately go to price, and our assumption about the user is that, we're going to have to beg, borrow, and plead to get them to come to our services, when sometimes we could be, in fact, many a time I think, we could actually be doing value add pricing, or we could be doing premium pricing, right? But we're so quick for that discount. Okay, and that's one of the things we have to start questioning ourselves on, and questioning even the pricing standards that we've been using, the pricing assumptions and calculations and premises that we've been using in our organization. And I think most organizations, kind of do a review periodically every so many years, but something to keep in mind, right? That maybe we have to question, should we be leading with the discount? What does that do to margins? Have we looked at other strategies for what we're trying to do with this? And especially in a growth mindset, it's very important to understand what that might mean. It might mean we need to undercut on price, might mean lower, might need giveaway, might need bundles. Also could have some different aspects to it. Could be a completely new market where you don't have anyone in there and there is no sort of price, understanding yet, where you're doing price setting. So an interesting kind of piece to understand. Small other things you might want to say, can you, live stream it? Do I have to be there live? Can I be there virtually, right? Can I live stream it? Is there a reason I couldn't do it? Maybe I don't have it now, but would that help us to, to hit our numbers and grow and things like that? Are we artificially constraining ourselves by not adding on a piece of digital technology or a process that would help us, that would actually benefit us longer term, such as having captured content? So if I'm having a live event, have I maximized the utility of all the content that I possibly could suck the marrow out of the event's bones there to get all that content that I could possibly repurpose later for lead generation, that I could possibly resell later on, bundle up, offer, repurpose, use for lead generation, etc. What about some other ideas there for assessing my live event? Do I have any sort of facilitated networking, right? So many times organizations will say our main value is in being able to do education and networking. Okay, well, at the live event, have you really facilitated that nowadays, right? Have we looked at the user nowadays? Are they struggling with some of their social dynamics? It's not perhaps the same type of user it used to be, the same type of attendee, I should say. Do they need a little help, right? That's more than, hi, here's the bar in the corner for, for the cocktail hour afterwards. And, that's supposed to just be instant networking. maybe it doesn't work that way anymore, depending on who your actual attendees are, who you're trying to target. Maybe they would feel more comfortable if you actually put something in there to help them facilitate the networking. Are you providing lists of people, of registrants that they can exchange? Is there some way that everybody can get to know each other? Is it on them? Is the burden on them for them to be able to find other people when they're at the event and exchange? Or could they have a whole access to maybe an online community, pre, during, post, so they can actually continue that? They can extend the value of your event. All those types of things. Food choices. Seemingly, that seems simple. Why is that on there? So again, as we look at who the target attendee is in this case, because we're talking about an event, are we choosing food choices that are aligned with the way that they eat nowadays, depending on who it is? Are we looking at an event that might be multi-generational, right? That might have changed with the culture of who's coming, et cetera, who we want to come. Have we thought that through? Now, most of your event team, of course, is going to say yes, of course, but you would be amazed at how many events are still out there that we're like, oh, we've signed it up. We do a chapter luncheon, every month at the Hilton, and we get the chicken with a side of rice with the béarnaise sauce or whatever, right? A vegetable, a tea and coffee service and iced tea. And it's like the same thing, and it hasn't changed in 15, 20 years, right? And we have to look at those things because that might be a food choice that's going for a particular audience, but a different audience would be, that's not what is kind of in style, because food has a style to it. So things of that nature. Along those lines, the location and the venue, right? So are these things now matching up to whom we're actually trying to attract? Are there other things, alternatives we have to do to attract the right, people that we want, or is it all working? So, and these are, again, there's no right or wrong answers. It's just saying, should we look at this as a criteria, right? Maybe one of the reasons is, the location, and we're trying to, again, let's say, attract millennials, and they don't own cars, and it's like very expensive to get there via Uber or what have you. They can't walk there. They can't get there by the bus. They don't believe in taking the subway. They're all above ground people. Like, do we understand those types of things? Is the venue maybe not the right one anymore for what the crowd that we need to service, et cetera? So just criteria to start to really reflect and say, have we been on autopilot a little bit too long? Yes or no? And just not, and again, we're looking at it compared to ourselves, compared to what else is out there. So for example, one of the things I know that keeps some of our clients up at night is that if they look at this and they go, "Ooh, that's exactly what we've been doing. We're using the Hilton Garden Inn every chapter meeting for the last decade, and we've got a great rate locked in, and F&B is this, and every our order is done, and it's just a rinse and repeat, very low kind of thing." And you start saying, well, I don't understand why the marketing isn't working. We keep trying to send emails and people aren't registering. Well, one has to say, one, do you have the right people? And two, is it marketable, right? So we have to say, does it still continue to be as valuable as it was in the format? All of these things are little things that we can tweak. All right, so that whole idea set, that whole approach and methodology of picking the right criteria, being able to understand, self-reflect for yourself versus what other things that are out there, we can then apply, right, to all of our other standards, programs, and services that we've had, such as, again, our live event, large conference, maybe the annual meeting. So we can take pretty much all the same things. And here we might also add in things like, do we have any sort of hybrid event component, where during the event it's baked in that I can actually have some sort of virtual connection with the audience, the actual physical audience that's in place. So there's a lot of high-tech conferences, et cetera, where the speaker is actually on stage and they're taking back feedback, in real time from Twitter and answering it. Whatever that might look like to you, is there some sort of blend? So you have like an offline, not off, but you have a virtual audience to live audience kind of way to put them together, to interweave that together to make it a little bit more interesting and exciting. Also, of course, the longtime favorites like the right session formats, the right length of time, etc., the social media channels you're using, and also I would the other ones too. And I'd say particularly, I don't see a lot on unlike the local, like the one-day small conferences where music is as big as a factor. But music is often a huge piece of large conferences and annual events. And just the music alone might need to be, you know, you might want to critically look at that and say, well, what are we doing? And like, what is the for-profit who's out there? What are they doing for music, right? Are they changing it up? Is it different than what we're doing? Maybe we've chosen music because we think this, but this is what they're doing. Little things like that, again, are all, you know, going to resonate with your audience, et cetera, and also be able to attract, et cetera. Those are things little tiny things we need to keep in mind, because we need to make sure that it's targeted to the right people, right? And those factors make a big difference. Now, most people, when they're doing competitive analysis, they weren't thinking for their annual meeting, they weren't thinking about music, but I think it's probably a good way to look at it, because again, from that standpoint, now you're really looking at the association, you know, versus, let's say, other for-profits, and are they doing something that's more attractive, et cetera. Okay, so taking the same analysis and now moving on to what about your website? Okay, so I think most of us that are redoing our websites all do this competitive analysis. I'd say this one is where it's a continuous check about how we compare to maybe direct competitors that have another alternative of service or products that they're offering. But it could also be things that, you know, instead of being a competitor, it could be, you know, where we want to be a website role model, let's say. So of course I think most of us have gone through time to say we've got to make our website responsive, work on mobile, etc. How do we compare, whatnot? But what about other things like interactive features? Do we have interactive features on our website where people, members, non-members, before I log in, before I don't, can actually play, can actually interact with the website? We know now that the digital age is very interactive. The user has to have some experience. I wish I had a way to click right now, and I should be doing this ourselves, but our users say they just want to listen to lectures. So, okay, but interactive, right? Being able to have the user take part of that. That's a very important feature now in website design, email design, certainly mobile app design. All of that's important. Having personalized content experience. When I get to the website, is it changing based on me? Do your competitors have that? Do another association, right? They might be a competitor to you. Then your member might also be, maybe it's a specialty association for your particular you know, medical discipline. Do they have something more than you do? Do they does their content actually, is it contextualized? Does it change based on what I'm actually, who I am, what I'm looking to do, right? Is it helping me along? Am I using those types of triggers within my my website, having additional like digital point tool solutions like, excuse me, like Bright Info, et cetera, on there to help me out? Like, are those things in there? Do my competitors have a better login and SSO experience, more seamless? You would be amazed, maybe you wouldn't, but for so many organizations, when we do the analysis and we say, hi, what happened? I don't know, we sent the email, they got to the page, we can see it through digital metrics, they went to register, they went to go ahead and say, I want to buy the webinar, I want to go to the small one-day conference, and then what happened? Abandoned cart. They stopped. Why? They had to log in. They had to log into their member piece, and it's for whatever reason they abandoned cart, and you know, they abandoned the login process. You have to say, are you looking at that piece? Do your other alternatives out there? Is it an easier shopping experience? Have we looked at our e-commerce pieces from a while? You know, when's the last time we looked at that from a user experience perspective, right? How easy is it? One touch. Can I just log in using Facebook credentials? All those things are important because, again, hate to rip the Band-Aid, but associations are still being evaluated at the same criteria level as for-profits. Usually the user is not cutting you a break because you are an association. They have alternatives out there. If the alternative is able to provide it in a more, seamless way that has less distress to the user, right? They're gonna go that way. Okay. What about that? You know, have you thought about that one? So let's say my same example. I was looking at the agenda for the annual conference. And you should know that, right? You as the organization with today's tools should know I'm looking at that. And then I went to, I spent, a good 4 seconds on it. I clicked into a speaker. I clicked a couple places on the site. And looks like I actually said I'm interested in registering, and then I went away, okay? Or I didn't even click that far. I've just been watching, I've been clicking around saying I'm interested. Do you have an email that comes back out to them that's contextualized saying, hi, people like you who are interested in these topics of this speaker, right? Here's why they decided to go to the conference. Or there's one that's personalized from that particular keynote speaker that says, hi, I'm so-and-so. I'm glad you're interested in my topic. I'd love to see you at the annual conference coming up, etc. Technology should allow you to do that, right? For-profits, etc., other organizations out there certainly have that ability, right? To be able to follow you. It's kind of like email retargeting, etc. But that should be there. You have to say, okay, how do we stack up? Are we losing an opportunity because maybe we're not taking advantage of all the technology out there, that we are losing an opportunity to further engage that user? Are we maximizing digital is perhaps the better way to say that. All right. Okay. So we can go along the line, and I filled out just a couple of other tabs here from a criteria viewpoint of things to think about. Okay, so I'll just kind of go that, and we'll send that, like I said, back out. Okay, so online education, etc. Okay, a couple things there. One thing I note on online education, because I think many organizations offer online education, and many of them have these kinds of things, looking at, do we have the right modern platform for today's world that, again, it's all about the user experience, seamless, easy to use, doesn't take a lot to log in and register because people have no attention span and they have very low patience levels. But also looking at things like, simple things like, is the evaluation easy to do? Is it lengthy? Can I do it on my phone? It's like one click. It's like promoter score. Would I recommend to a friend? I'm on with it. The content leaders I have for online education, again, are they the right ones, right? How does that compare to what the other competition's doing? Again, do I have other ways to continue the dialogue? Can I get that content later? Do I get more newsletters from it later on other topics that are related? All those types of things. One of my favorite is if you have an online education platform, a learning management system, etc., has it been completely designed to be gated for people that the assumption is you have to have already been there before you actually log in or get to the content. Many of the software out there in today's world, it should be open enough that it's getting indexed by, let's say, a Google or Bing, etc., or there's ways to point people there, and it's not a build it and they will come, right? We're not just putting out a library or a catalog and assuming that somehow people are going to find this thing and get there. And you'd be amazed at how many of the learning management systems out there are kind of gated and they're not actually open to being indexed. That's unfortunate because from a growth standpoint, from being able to do acquisition strategies, one of the biggest hooks that you have from a content perspective is your online education. Curated content or on-demand content, etc., that you have. Maybe some of it you give away as a hook again, or you have parts of it, and if you can't get that stuff indexed in a search, that is really unfortunate. That's very hard to work around, right? It would make more sense to have a platform that's been designed to actually interact with this digital consumer. And last two things there on online education before we move on is two thoughts there of, with our online education, almost all learning management systems have the ability to track, the registrant, they have come into a session, et cetera, or how long they've used it, whether it's reading the content or watching a video, et cetera, or being within a session like today. We can see, of course, how long it is, but can we also say, kind of related to being able to index, how they actually got to our online education? That's key. Can I actually see the source of how I got those people? Because again, if I'm going to use it for growth, being able to understand how people got to my online education and is it working? So I put out a banner ad and that worked and they came there and I can see that conversion loop. It's really important, right? And I want to be able to see that now, because that will then dictate where my dollars go from the marketing perspective, because we don't want to be guessing, right? And the last piece on that one would be the idea of lead scoring. And really, I could have put this on every tab that we're talking about. And so again, this would be that in using online education from a lead generation standpoint, the people that interact with this, that take part of it, that have come to the, let's say the homepage of the online education site, or that have come to pieces of it, or have, utilized some of the webinars, etc. Do I have the ability to tie a score to that, to say, okay, for each person that has attended at least one webinar, they get 10 points, and allow me to start to differentiate my own target, or my own consumer population, so that I can understand where my hotspots are, because that's a key part. So if I am on a platform that allows me to do even these three things, I should say, now I'm talking growth. And again, I think it's interesting because it's a different framework from looking at what are maybe the for-profits offering, what are we offering, and then have our premises changed. Because maybe before it was all locked in there because we were so afraid to open up our content. But now actually we need it to do lead generation. And if I don't have these three pieces, right, or if I don't have a way to get data out, I don't have a way to interconnect my online education with my association management system, or marketing automation system, or email marketing system, I don't have a good way to do that, then that's, I'm probably doing it manually, right? And it's not as effective and efficient as it could be. So a couple of other interesting criteria to think about. So I'm going to pause on that. I'm going to return back over to our slide deck. And then I want to go into today's user, right? So we talked about all those things and how to use that same analysis and look at different criteria. Of course, I'm just giving you ideas. I think each team needs to either have a consultant like we do and facilitate the discussion, or to have it internally, whatever's going to work for you guys. But then to say, okay, great. So we're looking at what we offer today, and we're seeing how we assess ourselves compared to other providers, et cetera, on the market. And then we want to say, okay, great. Now, we could either do this piece ahead of time, or we could do it now and say, great, let's talk about, so that's great. We've got that filled out. Here's how we compare to what we see out there. Okay, and we see how we're doing. Then we say, do we understand ZMOD? Have we had what's called the zero moment of truth, which is called ZMOD? Okay, have we really said, okay, that's what we're doing today, and then what was that program based around, what was the premise, et cetera, and then have we said, okay, but is that today's consumer? How does what we're doing today compare to today's consumer, and then the consumer that we want to have, maybe in the future, et cetera? Okay, and are any of those out of alignment? And if they're out of alignment, we should probably take steps to put them into alignment. Okay, so the idea of zero moment of truth is understanding, fully understanding, not just saying, yeah, the consumer has the power, but really understanding that everything's changed, right? The buying patterns have shifted, that word of mouth and referral is more powerful than the organization trying to tell you and, blast email you about why you should do what, register. Really understanding the trust factor in brands, and really understanding how people really make purchase decisions in today's world, and not separating out the today's consumer behavior from all of a sudden somehow it's different if it's a member or a prospective member. That there is one consumer, and you are just another set of consumption options out there, and you again are being compared to other alternatives, and that you're now in a world where typically it's overwhelming how much competition you have. So you're going from perhaps not thinking from a competitive mindset of there's alternatives to all of a sudden being overwhelmed and perhaps frozen to say, oh, there's always somebody out there who is, bigger, faster, stronger, has it, cheaper, blah, 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 right? And then that's the world we're in. We're in a competitive landscape all the time. And then again, what can we do to differentiate ourselves? What can we do to make sure that we're differentiated? And again, I tell you, for associations, you're in a great spot if you can get into the competitive, agile kind of world, because most organizations, most associations are not new, and they have huge established brands, brand recognition, you know, tons, and I mean, incredible credibility on the market, et cetera, from which you can leverage, right? And so the only downside would be if you're not evolving to meet the consumer and consumer behavior and the expectations, et cetera, of course you can have some brand erosion. So all of a sudden you keep sending email newsletters and they look like they are from, you know, 1999, and then, you know, you're trying to hit a new market and it's like, you have a disconnect, and it's like, well, that's not for me. Because the, you know, user says it has to resonate, again, because it's all about the user, right? They don't care that you can only have one template. It doesn't look like something that they would use. They abandon ship. So we have to kind of get through that and understand the consumer has the power. It's all about the user. Everything is about user experience. And then understanding that in the zero moment of truth as well, that the credibility, as much credibility as we have, as let's say a 100-year-old association brand, we no longer have that ability to say, to dictate or to strongly emphasize what we would like them to do, right? So it's a different approach. So being able to send out an email campaign and saying, you know, join now. I bought a list somewhere else and I'm blast emailing them saying, join now, join now, join now. Why that doesn't work, right? Why that social trust, that social credibility, that has to be there so that we can really be able to move a user in today's world along the buyer's journey. We've all become these skeptical consumers who are, you know, who are out there shopping online and doing a lot of comparison and doing the research and understanding. And why would it be different when they're thinking about joining your organization or not, getting a certification or not? They're looking at all the alternatives for their time and money, and it goes right back to values and what they find as valuable and where they are in their life, et cetera, and how you appeal to them personally, right? And that's another piece, I think, especially important for associations, is that we have to look at, have cultural norms or social norms changed about the value of perhaps being a member or being a part of something, et cetera? And how do we fit into this kind of fragmented, hyper-competitive, hugely, you know, global world of alternatives? So, to that point, right, one of the other factors of understanding zero moment of truth is really accepting that the buyer's journey has changed. You know, that we can't, we can say to ourselves we should do a direct mail piece and it should be 6 months before the annual conference, and we can say to ourselves that people should start signing up. But perhaps the change really in the buyer's journey and the change in just the time frame and everything else, the truth is that people don't buy that way anymore. They don't get a direct mail piece and say, yeah, I'm going to spend $1,000 of my money 6 months ahead of time to go to this conference, right? It may or may not be the case, but we have to ask that question. Is what we're expecting the user to do in line with the way that users now shop and how they now make those types of buying decisions? Now, it could be that the type of conference you have is absolutely situated, it's so in alignment, it has so much demand that they will go ahead and get in and register right away and reserve that spot because it's a limited supply and they want in. That we all want to be there for events, et cetera, et cetera. But what I often see is that that's not the case, and what happens with events in particular, which is such a big part of typically non-dues revenue, is that we're still, our time for promotion has not really fundamentally changed in the last 10 years. But what's happening is that when buyers are actually registering has absolutely materially changed. So I might be still now getting like 6 months ahead of time, 9 months ahead of time, setting save the date, register, early bird, early bird, early bird, and none of it's making a difference, or even more so, I've taught people to wait, like Black Friday. I've taught the American consumer population to not buy in November and wait until Black Friday to go get discounts, right? So they're waiting artificially until maybe you drop the price or it gets closer to the date, or they know their schedule more, maybe there's too much flux, what have you. But we have to kind of say, how has the change in the buyer's journey happened, and are we situated to be able to flex to that and to take advantage of it. And events are just a good example of that. Also, of course, there's the gating of content, always a popular, sometimes white-knuckled conversation where we spent years and years and years protecting all of our content and saying it's members only. And now we realize that very little on our site is getting indexed, etc., because all of it is behind a password protected wall, right? And so how do we ungate that content if we need to do lead generation? So we're coming off of maybe having a membership that was stable, very high retention rates, and we didn't have to grow, and they knew what we had, and we didn't have to explain ourselves, and they just, it was great. And now we're moving to a world where that's not the case. It's a new crop of people maybe, and they have no idea you even exist, let alone what you have to offer. And the big piece there is that we've turned into this try before you buy culture. So even though you might say, hi, we've got all this great, and again, this is the difference of word of mouth and referral. You can say all day long, you as the brand can say, hi, our association has all this information. We have great jobs, we have networking, we have this great community, we have these events you can go to, you can get discounts, and all you have to do is give us $400 and then we'll show you how great it is, right? And for today's consumer, it might be that that's just not going to fly, that they need to be in a try before you buy situation, right? They need to sample, they need to taste sample it, they need to taste test it, they need to have something, because we become these skeptical buyers to say, I don't want to be locked in, right? I want to be in this kind of ability to have like a monthly payment focus, right? So most Americans, certainly, if you're looking at pricing strategy and things like that, have become accustomed to being sold everything and thinking of things in monthly payment terms, right? So think of it as your mobile phone plan, your cable plan, your internet plan, your, we can get you into a low lease, $24.99 down at signing, and it's only, $329 a month. We've taken these maybe large-scale luxury purchases and broken it down into bite-sized monthly pieces, right? And then really push the idea that everyone deserves that Mercedes. We should all be living at this luxury level, regardless of, as long as the willingness to pay is there. And so that might be something that, and I know a lot of organizations are looking at their pricing strategy when it comes to membership dues, as well as things like conferences. So before, maybe it used to be that somebody would say, yeah, I'm absolutely in. I'm going to plunk down $2,000 of my own money to go to my professional membership conference, and I'm going to do it 6, 7, 8 months in advance with hotels and flights or what have you. And nowadays it's like, that just seems way overwhelming, where if I broke that down to a low monthly payment or something of $250 a month and was able to pay over time, that might substantially change, it might change. So it's all things to think about. Okay, so again, back to applying that to the tool. Let me pop over here, our last couple of minutes. So if we take that idea and we say, wow, knowing those things, we're thinking about a different, perhaps, type of consumer. Ideally, that's where those personas come up, and I want to be able to draw those out and say, okay, I understand, okay, maybe here's my retention population, don't want anything to change with that group, but here's maybe some target groups in which I need to grow. And in order for me to attract the people that make up that target population, I need to, again, look at how I'm putting things out there in order to attract them and to get them to convert to what have you, some sort of buyer, whatever that might mean for your association. So a couple of quick ways to do that is just, again, taking some old classics. So taking just the almighty association newsletter and saying, great, if I accept the 0 moment of truth and I accept who the user is nowadays, and that's, that's just how consumers typically shop nowadays, and that's regardless of age at all. It's just, we're all kind of been schooled into that. If we look at that from that standpoint, we look at our newsletters, we should have another set of criteria. So here's one thing that we use to really assess email, because that's a big piece of the way associations communicate, perhaps the biggest piece, aside from the website. And we have to say, okay, great, here's some criteria to think about. So, are the newsletters responsive? That's an easy one. Does it work on mobile? If I have a 4-column I don't know, email, and all of a sudden it goes to mobile and it's like, nah, I can't get in there and look at it. Is my layout of the newsletter, is that competitive? Does it look like other newsletters that are out there in today's world, right? If I'm looking at, again, same consumer, if they're a consumer and they're looking at other brands like a Nike or a Mercedes, et cetera, and they're looking at ESPN, do you have the consumer that you're trying to target? What else are they looking at? And is what they get from you as the association in the same vein, right? Is it really the same thing? I would tell you, since we do a lot of email analysis and design, that typically it's not, that the layouts that are being used oftentimes are actually doing a disservice to the brand. They're outdated. They're making you look like you're not kind of with the times, like you have some big sidebar with table of contents and all these anchor links and all these, or like you only have a tiny snippet and I have to go to the website and I constantly get my email experience disrupted because I have to constantly go back to the website. You don't actually give me anything of value in the newsletter. And sometimes it's just the layout. Same thing with images, fonts, styles, content format, short content, long format content. Do I want to disrupt the user? Is really the point of my email to bring people back to the website, or am I trying to give them content within the email and it's specific to them? Those kinds of things. Back to interconnection to website. Is it all designed to work together in one big seamless loop from a digital experience, right? Or am I thinking in my organization, my website, my email, my social, my video, and live event, and these are all separate components? Or am I really having kind of an omni-channel experience? How am I relating to others? How are they looking at me, right? Do I have things like conversion tracking on there, right? Not just like open rate and click-through. Click-through is not conversion. Click-through is I clicked on the button, but then what, right? What happened after you clicked on the link? Where did you go? How does that look together? Just like your website, no different on email. Is it contextual? Is it different for each individual email recipient, right? Email is the most intimate of all the channels. It's supposed to be one-to-one. It's me and my email and my phone, and it's look how close I am, right? So it should be completely designed for me and not in a blast format, right? It should, the content in there, the communications it's giving me, the data it's giving me should be about me. And the same thing then for the website, et cetera. Can I use this as lead generation? You would be amazed, maybe you wouldn't, I don't know. But you just ask yourself, if I'm trying to grow and I'm looking at alternatives on the market, how many of those organizations have used subscribe to our newsletter for a non-member, a non-event person, et cetera? That is like a standard in online programs and services to get to know a brand. It's sign up for our newsletter. And for many organizations, they don't have that. They only have a members only newsletter. So you never get any content unless, right, you have signed up and already paid. And remember, we said in that try before you buy, this is such an easy one. Every good email program has a sign-up form to it, etc. The question is, are you using it? Have you changed how you're trying to think of it? Because ultimately, you want them to give you your email address so you can communicate and nurture them. Okay, so same idea. I've given you a webinars tab to look at from that standpoint, many of the same things. I've also said, hey, why don't we look at ourselves from once we've gotten past the zero moment of truth, from an idea of things like, how do we compare to another association or another brand that's supplying alternatives to things like LinkedIn, right? How do we compare? How's our LinkedIn presence compare to the way that they're using LinkedIn? I think that's an interesting one. Probably most of us haven't maybe thought about that. We do that type of analysis all the time. So how are we using, are we maximizing the channel of LinkedIn, which for many organizations is a paramount one because it's professional, right? Am I using that in the best way for my brand? So how do we compare? Do we have, let's say maybe we're using it as a group. Do we have somebody in there? Is it just kind of hanging on the vine? Are we using Pulse for content? Are we using the analytics? Do we have things interconnected? Do they have it interconnected? Let's say SlideShare or social publishing. Are we using the LinkedIn profiles? You know, are we using InMail to do some sort of reach out for maybe event registration or things like that? Are we using LinkedIn for advertising? Are they? How do we compare? You get the idea, okay? And I also gave you one for mobile app, etc. And my first one is just, do you have a mobile app that's beyond being used for the event, right? And if not, why? Should we look at that? Most organizations say, oh, well, we made our website responsive. Is it the same experience as a mobile app? Does it translate? Is there something that would be better and more personal through a mobile app? You know, things to think about, and also kind of some other criteria to use there. And the last tab I have on this one is on digital advertising. Similarly to mobile app, do we, number one, does it exist? Do we have digital advertising? Typically, if you look at our State of Digital Marketing and Associations report, it is the lowest on the totem pole with the least amount of money put towards it. Right? The money is all put into the website and email, but those two things are based on people already knowing your existence. So if I have to grow and I don't have any money in digital advertising, but the other guy does, well, might explain why they're able to do more and sell more of their product, program, services, etc. Okay, so a couple of things to do that. You know, are they doing keyword advertising? Are we? Are they doing retargeting? Are we? Which channels are they using in digital advertising? You know, are they doing advertorial content? Are they doing sponsored content on Twitter or LinkedIn or et cetera, right? So all kind of things for us to think about. Okay, so finally, we're kind of come back here and look just really quickly at the final kind of component, which I think is a critical one too, of understanding today's staff, okay? Because we have to always, again, look from a competitive viewpoint at all of the aspects, because if our staff is not, if they have a better staff than we do, or they have a different way that they do stuff, or their structure, they have different tools, then maybe that's part of their competitive advantage and that's part of their secret sauce, right? And we need to understand that. Okay, so maybe if we take the zero moment of truth, then we probably need to look at our own staff and say, you know, if the world is if the workforce, I should say, is multi-generational, diverse, et cetera, and of course it's all dependent on your organization, industry, and where you are, et cetera. But if that's the case, again, the question for the organization is, okay, can I use the same competitive matrix to say, is my staff competitive? Or are we being, a different way to put it, are we being, as an organization, are we being competitive in our ability to have the right talent, the right production piece of it, and being able to attract the right talent and be able to do that, right? And develop, those are the people developing the products and services and servicing the members. So it's something to ask ourselves. And so I can take that same idea and return back over to my matrix. And one of the things that I did here is I just took that same idea of the same competitive matrix idea, and I said, great, why don't I look at it from a sense of how does another, and you can name something, another association compared to my association? That might be a really good one to be able to look at. Because maybe the association people they're looking at working at your association or this association, and they're going to be an association professional or already are. Or how do they look at my association compared to, you know, a corporation or another alternative, et cetera. And so again, always the interesting thing is what criteria you pick. But some of the things I thought I'd throw out there as an idea to get you going is, if we look at our staff, and we look at, let's say, the hardware we're providing them, how do we compare to the other alternatives out there on the market, right? The other organizations providing jobs. How does our software compare? Again, if we're trying to attract, let's say, a new graduate or early into the career, and they're used to using certain tools that they had, and all of a sudden they come to our organization and they're using technology that has been around for a while, or the interface design is not something they would expect, it might be difficult. We might be putting ourselves at a competitive disadvantage, right? We have to look at all of those things, or maybe our staff hasn't kept up with it, and they don't know that there is a different way to do things, right? They don't know that there's other hardware and software and technology out there, or what have you, in order to be more effective and efficient and have more intelligence, let's say. What about the actual physical layout of the space of where we are? Maybe cubes don't work anymore. All these types of things, you can look at yourselves and say, compared to others. I know from just our own client base and going out, many organizations are redoing their workspaces. I was just able to go see Ohio Society of CPAs, beautifully new done office and interiors, and it's all laid out and it's all situated around kind of more collaboration and lowering the barriers and not having these departments, and it's all physical, right? The way that they've used word art and the word on the walls, it makes a huge difference. Maybe that becomes a competitive advantage for them over somebody going and working, I don't know, for the Ohio Hospital Association. Let's just say, throwing that out there. How do our benefits compare? If we want to be competitive, right, maybe we need benefits that match who we're trying to attract. Maybe the people we're trying to attract, having a 401k, I don't know, is not as attractive. Maybe it is. Maybe what they need is some sort of, I know some associations in Washington, D.C. now give like a housing credit because it's so expensive for, let's say, new staff to actually live there. They're giving a housing credit to keep them into the D.C. area so that they can keep the desirable labor force there. Same thing with training and talent development and rewards and evaluation. I know these are hot topics in the HR kind of administration side, but interesting to say, with changing workforce, maybe people can't wait a year for an evaluation. Maybe they need it again. Remember, we were talking about that monthly, the move to the zero moment of truth of consumers becoming far more monthly. Maybe that's something that we need to think about. And again, we're not in that same, our time frame of how we think about things has radically changed. Don't know. It's all dependent on you. These are just ideas for being able to throw that out there. So at the end of the day, we've taken that entire very simple matrix that we talked about how, but the importance is how do I apply it to what I apply it to, and then also how I want to evaluate it, right? And I think it's just, hopefully I've given you a lot of ideas for how to analyze that. And again, we're always kind of, I think in this one, looking at it from a threefold kind of approach. The competition, what are the buying alternatives out there? What's the user experience? How are we situating ourselves for how they would compare against others? And then also from an internal experience about internally our staff, how that can be analyzed and what their alternatives might be. So that was using our toolkit on using a kind of competitive analysis from a sales perspective and being able to apply it into an association world. I thank you very much. I certainly invite you to take part of any of our other toolkits we've had, or download those rather, and certainly hope to see that you're attending maybe our inbound lunch bunch, or you're part of other of our programs upcoming. Thanks very much and have a great weekend.